A stirring story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. She was a virgin in a world that sold pleasure. He only wanted one night, but found the only woman who reminded him of what he'd lost. Now, he must either destroy everything for her or lose her forever. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised. If you enjoy stories of love and romance, subscribe to this channel. Leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. New York City never truly slept. Even in the quietest early mornings, the city pulsed with a dark energy that infiltrated the pores of anyone who dared walk its streets after midnight. It was during these hours that the metropolis revealed its rawest face, stripped of the social masks it wore during the day. And it was during these same hours that Caleb Vincent felt most at home. Shadow was located in the West Village, a three-story building that went unnoticed during daylight hours, but transformed at night into the epicenter of everything society preferred to pretend didn't exist. From the outside, only discreet red neon signs and a dark wooden door. Inside, a labyrinth of velvet corridors, low lights and secrets whispered between walls that had witnessed more confessions than any church. Caleb observed everything from his third-floor office through monitors that captured every movement, every gesture, every glance exchanged in the rooms below. At 35, he had built an empire based on the simple premise that everyone had a price and everyone had secrets. Shadow wasn't just a nightclub. It was a modern confessional where people paid to be absolved of their darkest desires. He, himself, was a walking contradiction. Tall, with broad shoulders that perfectly filled the tailored suits he wore, Caleb had a thin scar that cut through his left eyebrow down to his cheekbone, a permanent reminder that the world didn't forgive the weak. His eyes were such a dark green, they appeared black in candlelight, and they carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and lost even more. That Thursday night, rain hammered against the office windows with an almost angry insistence. New York was being punished by an unexpected storm that had begun in the late afternoon and showed no signs of letting up. Downstairs, business was slower than usual. Few ventured out on streets on nights like this. Caleb adjusted his shirt cuff and took another sip of the whiskey that accompanied his work nights. Single malt, 18 years old, the same he'd been drinking for almost a decade. Consistency was important in his line of work. Predictability meant control, and control meant power. That's when she appeared. At first, she was just a dark blur running along the sidewalk in front of the club, fighting against the wind and rain that transformed each step into a battle. Caleb almost didn't pay attention until she stopped in front of Shadow's door. Through the external cameras, he could see her better. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, soaked from head to toe. She wore a grey coat that had already lost the battle against the storm and clutched a violin case as if it were a shield. She looked at the club's sign, hesitated for a moment that seemed eternal, and then, with a determined movement, pushed the door open. Michael, the entrance security guard, intercepted her immediately. Caleb couldn't hear the conversation, but from their body language, he could imagine. She pointed to the rain outside, made gestures indicating desperation, pleading. Michael shook his head, inflexible. The rules were clear. No one entered Shadow by accident, but there was something about her that sparked Caleb's curiosity. Perhaps it was the way she held her coat closed at the neck, like armor, or how she averted her gaze from everything around her, clearly out of her element, or even the way her posture, even soaked and trembling, maintained a dignity he rarely saw within those walls. He picked up the intercom and spoke directly into Michael's ear. "Let her in." "Boss, she doesn't seem our type of client." "Exactly. Let her in." Caleb hung up the intercom and continued watching. The young woman was led to the main hall, where red and gold lights created an atmosphere that oscillated between luxurious and sinful. She looked at everything as if she were on another planet. The velvet sofas where couples caressed each other, the bar where drinks were served in crystal glasses, the stairs that led to the upper floors and the more exclusive services of the establishment. Caleb knew he should return to the financial reports scattered across his desk. He knew he had 3 important meetings still that week, and that Raymond Sullivan had sent a message through intermediaries demanding a conversation he had been postponing for months. He knew all this, but still stood up from his chair and went downstairs. She was sitting in an armchair in the darkest corner of the hall, still holding the violin case in her lap. She had ordered only a coffee and a towel to dry herself, according to the waiter attending her. No alcohol, no food, just the basics to warm up. Caleb approached slowly, observing how she would react to his presence. Most women who frequented Shadow recognized him immediately. He was the type of man who drew attention without trying, who occupied the space around him simply by existing. But she didn't even raise her eyes when he stopped beside the armchair. "Complicated night to be on the street," he said, his voice low and controlled. She lifted her face then, and Caleb felt something he didn't expect. Her eyes were a light brown, almost golden, and carried a deep sadness that seemed disproportionate for someone so young. There was no makeup, no artifice, just a natural, melancholic beauty that caught him off guard. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I know this isn't my place. I just need to wait for the rain to stop." "Your place?" Caleb raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her choice of words. "And where would your place be?" She lowered her eyes again, her hands tightening on the case handle. "At home, at church, in the rehearsal room, anywhere but here." The brutal honesty of her response surprised him. In Caleb's world, no one spoke the truth at first meeting. People lied by instinct, created personas, hid their real motivations. But she had just admitted, without hesitation, that she was completely out of place. "What's your name?" "Emily." A pause. "Emily Lewis." "Caleb Vincent," he introduced himself, extending his hand. She hesitated before shaking it, and when she did, it was with a quickness that indicated discomfort with physical contact. Her hand was small, cold from the rain, and trembled slightly in the handshake. "Is this your club?" she asked, looking around with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. "It is," he answered, sitting in the armchair next to her without asking permission. "What's a violinist doing wandering the streets on a night like this?" Emily looked at him surprised. "How do you know I play the violin?" "The case, and the way you hold it. Like it's the most precious thing you have." She blushed slightly, a pink tone rising up her pale cheeks. "I had an argument with my father. I left home without really thinking." "What kind of argument?" "The kind we always have. He thinks music is a waste of time, that I should be preparing to take on responsibilities at the church." Caleb studied her face, looking for signs of lies or manipulation. He found none. There was only a disarming sincerity that made him uncomfortable. He was accustomed to deciphering people, finding their weak points and using them when necessary. But Emily seemed to be exactly what she appeared, a lost young woman, far from home, in a world she didn't understand. "And you? What do you do besides this?" She gestured vaguely to the environment around them. Caleb almost smiled. It was the first time in years that someone had asked about his life with genuine curiosity, without ulterior motives. "This is all I do," he said, "and all I know how to do." "I don't believe that." "Why not?" "Because nobody is born knowing how to be this." She searched for the right words. "Owner of a place like this, everyone has a previous story." She was right, of course. Caleb had a previous story. He had memories of a time when he didn't need to sleep with a gun under his pillow, when he didn't check dark corners before entering any environment, when he still believed that the world could be fair. But those memories seemed to belong to someone else. "Some stories are better left buried," he said. "Mine too," she replied softly. They sat in silence for a few minutes, observing the movement in the club. A couple went up the stairs hand in hand, laughing at some intimate joke. At the bar, a man in an expensive suit bought champagne for a woman who could be his daughter. On the dance floor, bodies moved to the sound of sensual electronic music. "Are you afraid of me?" Caleb asked suddenly. Emily looked him in the eyes for the first time since he had sat down. "Should I be? Most people are. I'm not most people." "No," he agreed. "You're not." The rain continued beating against the windows, but with less intensity. Soon she could leave, return to her life of psalms and violin, forget that she had spent an hour in a nightclub talking with a man like Caleb. The prospect of seeing her leave bothered him more than it should. "Where did you learn to play?" "It with my father at first. Then I went to conservatory. I graduated last year." "And what do you play?" "Classical, Baroque mainly. Bach, Vivaldi, Telemann." Caleb didn't know the names, but there was something in the way she pronounced them that revealed true passion. "You could play here," he said impulsively. "What?" She seemed genuinely shocked. "Here at the club, some nights it would be different." "I couldn't. My father." "Your father doesn't need to know." Emily shook her head vigorously. "You don't understand. I can't just do things my father wouldn't approve of. Not like this." "And what do you want? Does what you want matter?" The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. Caleb realized he had touched on something deep, a wound she didn't even know existed. She began, then stopped. "I've never thought about it that way." "Then maybe it's time to start." The rain had diminished to a fine drizzle. Emily looked at the window and sighed. "I should go." "You should," he agreed, but didn't move from the armchair. She stood up, adjusted her still damp coat, and picked up her violin case. "Thank you for letting me stay." "Thank you for staying." She began walking towards the exit, but stopped halfway and turned around. "Caleb?" "Yes?" "Your proposal about playing here, were you serious?" He studied her face, trying to understand what was behind the question. "Completely serious. And if I said that maybe I want to think about it?" Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Anticipation. "I'd say you know where to find me." Emily nodded once and went out the door, disappearing into the rainy New York night. Caleb stood in the middle of the hall for a few minutes, observing the place where she had been sitting. The armchair still held the shape of her body, still carried the subtle perfume she wore, something floral and discreet that didn't match the club's heavy atmosphere at all. He went back up to the office but couldn't concentrate on the reports. His thoughts constantly returned to her, to the way she had hesitated before shaking his hand, to the sadness hidden in her golden eyes, to the question she had asked before leaving. Caleb Vincent had built his entire life on the premise that people were predictable, that everyone ultimately wanted the same thing, power, money, pleasure, or validation, that all he had to do was identify what someone wanted to have control over that person. But Emily had broken all his rules in a single conversation. She didn't want anything from him, hadn't tried to impress him, hadn't shown interest in his business or his money, and perhaps that was exactly why he couldn't get her out of his head. 3 days passed before she returned. Emily spent the next 3 days in a silent battle with herself. During the day, she tried to maintain her usual routine, waking up at 6 in the morning for morning prayers with her father, having a frugal breakfast in silence, practicing violin for 4 hours in the back room of the house, helping organize evening services. It was a meticulously organized life, every minute planned to glorify God and maintain the purity of the soul. But at night, when she lay in her narrow bed in the Spartan room she had occupied for more than 15 years, her thoughts inevitably turned to that club in the West Village, to the green-eyed man who had spoken to her as if her opinions mattered, to the question that kept echoing in her mind. And what do you want? Does what you want matter? Pastor Lewis noticed the change in his daughter on the second day. For 22 years, Emily had been as predictable as a Swiss watch. She woke up at the same time, ate the same amount, practiced the same pieces, smiled at the same appropriate moments. But now there was something different in her eyes, a restlessness he couldn't identify or control. "You're distracted during prayers," he said Wednesday evening, after the service. "Your mind is elsewhere." Emily lowered her eyes, as she always did when he confronted her. "Sorry, Father, I'm just thinking about Sunday's performance." It was a lie, and they both knew it. She had been playing at Sunday services since she was 14. She knew the repertoire by heart, could play Amazing Grace in her sleep. But Pastor Lewis preferred to believe the lie rather than investigate more deeply. Some truths were too dangerous to be discovered. On Thursday night, exactly 1 week after her first encounter with Caleb, Emily made a decision that would change her life forever. She waited for her father to fall asleep, put on the same dark clothes she had worn the night of the storm, picked up her violin, and left home for the first time in her life without permission. Shadow was more crowded than the previous week. The dry weather had brought back the regular clientele, and Emily had to make an effort not to show her shock at seeing couples in intimate situations spread across the sofas in the main hall. This time, Michael recognized her immediately. "The boss is waiting for you," he said, as if he knew she would return. Caleb met her in the same place where they had talked the week before. He wore a navy blue dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked by small scars that told stories she dared not imagine. When he saw her, something changed in his expression, a tension she didn't know how to interpret. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said, approaching slowly. "I thought so too," she admitted, hugging the violin case against her chest. "But you came." "I did." They observed each other for a moment, two predators of different species trying to understand the rules of the game. Caleb was accustomed to women who knew exactly what they wanted from him, who spoke the language of desire fluently. Emily was an enigma, a score in a language he didn't master. "Would you like something to drink?" "I don't drink alcohol." "Juice, water, coffee?" "Coffee is fine." He signaled to a waiter who brought 2 coffees in fine porcelain cups. Emily noticed that even the club's utensils were of superior quality, every detail designed to create an atmosphere of discreet luxury. "Did you think about my proposal?" Caleb asked after they were alone again. "I haven't stopped thinking about it," she answered with the brutal honesty that continued to surprise him. "And?" Emily looked around, observing the movement in the club. A woman in a red dress went up the stairs, accompanied by 2 men. At the bar, groups discussed business in low tones while drinking expensive whiskey. It was a completely different world. From hers, a universe where the rules that governed her life didn't apply. "I want to try," she said finally, "but I have conditions." Caleb raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I'm listening." "No sensual music, nothing that could be interpreted as provocative, just classics." "Agreed." "And I only play. I don't participate in anything else." "Obviously." "And if at any moment I feel uncomfortable, you stop and leave, no questions, no explanations." The speed with which he agreed reassured her. There was something in the way Caleb spoke, a certainty that suggested his word had real value. "When do you want me to start?" Now. Now. She seemed genuinely surprised. The club has a small stage on the second floor, more intimate, less intense than down here. How about checking it out? Emily hesitated for just a second before nodding. They went up a side staircase that she hadn't noticed on her first visit, passing through corridors decorated with abstract paintings in shades of red and gold. The second floor was divided into several smaller environments, each with its own personality and function. The stage Caleb mentioned was in a circular room with about 15 tables, all occupied by clients who conversed in low tones. The lighting was even more subtle than on the ground floor, creating an intimate atmosphere that resembled a New York jazz club more than anything else. "Normally we have ambient electronic music," explained Caleb. "Nothing too loud, just something to fill the silence. But I believe your classics can create a different experience." Emily got up on the small stage, assembled her violin with precise movements that revealed years of practice, and looked at the audience. For the first time in her life, she wasn't playing to glorify God or please her father. She was playing because she wanted to, because she had chosen to. She began with Bach, Partita No. 2 in D minor, a piece she had known since adolescence. The first notes filled the environment like a whisper, delicate and precise. Gradually, the conversations diminished, eyes turning toward the stage. There was something hypnotic in the way Emily played, an absolute concentration that transformed each note into a confession. Caleb watched from a table at the back of the room, fascinated by the transformation he was witnessing. On stage, Emily was no longer the shy and repressed young woman he had met. She was an artist, a force of nature channeling emotions through strings and wood. Her eyes were closed, her body moved gently with the music, and there was a peace on her face that he had never seen before. Bach's music gave way to Vivaldi, then to Telemann, pieces that spoke of courtly love, of aristocratic melancholy, of an era when feelings were expressed through subtle codes and complex melodies. It was completely different from anything that had ever sounded within those walls, and the effect was extraordinary. When she finished the small recital, the silence in the room lasted several seconds before giving way to discreet but warm applause. Emily opened her eyes, seeming to awaken from a trance, and blushed as she realized everyone was watching her. She disassembled the violin quickly and descended from the stage, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "It was incredible," said Caleb when she approached his table. "I thought it would be disastrous. I'm not used to playing for this kind of audience." "What kind of audience?" "People who aren't obligated to listen to me out of politeness or religious devotion." Caleb smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen since they met. "They listened because they wanted to, because you made them want to listen." Emily sat at the table, still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the performance. "It was different," she admitted. "Playing here, it was as if the music meant something different." "How so?" "In church I play for God. At home I play for my Father's approval. Here I played for myself." The simplicity of the revelation hid its depth. Caleb realized he had witnessed something rare, the moment when someone discovered a part of herself she didn't even know existed. "Would you come back next week?" he asked. Yes, I think so. Same salary I pay the other musicians. You don't need to pay me." "Yes, I do. Work is work." They spent another hour talking, this time with less caution than at their first meeting. Emily asked about the history of the club, about how Caleb had gotten there. He told edited versions of the truth, omitting the darkest details, but giving her glimpses of a man who had built something significant from nothing. "And your family?" she asked at one point. The change in Caleb's expression was subtle but perceptible. Something closed in his eyes, a door slamming in her face. "I don't have a family," he said simply. "Everyone has a family. Maybe not close, but I don't," he repeated, his tone colder now. Emily realized she had touched on a forbidden subject and changed the topic, but continued observing Caleb discreetly. There was something painful there, a wound that hadn't completely healed. When it was time to leave, Caleb insisted on accompanying her to a taxi. On the street, under the yellowish light of the street lamps, she seemed even younger and more vulnerable. "Won't your father find it strange that you're going out at night? He sleeps early, and I'm careful." "Emily." "Yes? If at any point you feel this isn't right for you, just let me know. No drama, no explanations." She studied him for a moment, trying to understand where the genuine concern in his voice came from. "Why do you care?" "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I do." The taxi arrived and she got in, waving through the back window as she drove. Away! Caleb stood on the sidewalk for several minutes, hands in his pockets, watching the red taillights of the car disappear into the night traffic. Back at the club, he went up to his office and tried to concentrate on the business that really mattered. Raymond Sullivan had sent another message, more insistent this time. There were financial issues that needed to be resolved, territories that needed to be defended, alliances that needed to be strengthened or broken. But his mind kept returning to the young violinist, to the way her face had transformed when she played, to the moment when she had said she had played for herself for the first time. Caleb Vincent had survived in New York's underworld for more than 15 years by following a simple rule: never get emotionally involved. Emotions were luxuries that men like him couldn't afford. Emotions led to irrational decisions, and irrational decisions led to death. But as he reviewed the night's revenue reports, part of his mind was already planning improvements to the sound system on the second floor, thinking of ways to make the environment even more suitable for classical performances. For the first time in a long time, Caleb Vincent was breaking his own rules, and the scariest part was that he didn't care. The next morning, Emily woke up with a strange feeling in her chest, a mixture of guilt and euphoria that left her confused throughout the morning prayer. Her father noticed her distraction again, but this time didn't comment. There was something different in his daughter's posture, a subtle confidence he couldn't define. During violin practice, Emily found herself playing the same pieces she had performed at the club the night before. But now they sounded different, carried an emotion that wasn't there before. It was as if the music had gained a new dimension, a depth she didn't know was possible. Around noon, when she was organizing sheet music in the rehearsal room, she found a score she didn't remember seeing before. It was an arrangement of Schubert's Ave Maria, a version her conservatory teacher had transcribed, especially for her years ago. She had stored the score in a drawer, considering it inappropriate for services because it was excessively emotional. Emily assembled her violin and played the piece, losing herself in the melancholy and passionate melody. It was only when she finished that she realized her father was standing at the door, watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "What music was that?" he asked. "Schubert, Ave Maria." "I don't remember approving that piece for services." "You didn't approve it. I just wanted to play it." Pastor Lewis studied his daughter's face for a long moment. There was something different there, a small flame of rebellion that he needed to extinguish before it grew. "Emily," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "We need to talk." The conversation Pastor Lewis wanted to have with his daughter took place that same afternoon in the office attached to the church at the back of the house where they lived. It was an austere environment, with white walls decorated only with a wooden cross and some black and white photographs of religious leaders that Emily had never bothered to identify. The smell of old wood and Bible pages permeated the air, creating a solemn atmosphere that always made her feel small. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the simple wooden chair that sat in front of his desk. It was the same place where she had sat since childhood when she needed to be corrected for some transgression. Emily obeyed, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes lowered out of habit. 22 years of conditioning didn't disappear overnight. "You're different, Pastor Lewis," began, his voice controlled but laden with suspicion. "In recent days, I've noticed changes in your behavior. Distraction during prayers, music that hasn't been approved, a restlessness that doesn't match the peace that a daughter of God should demonstrate." He got up and began to walk around the small office, his hands folded behind his back, as he did when preparing particularly severe sermons. "I want you to tell me the truth, Emily. What's happening?" She raised her eyes for the first time, and something in her father's expression made her hesitate. There was something beyond paternal concern there, a hardness that frightened her. "Nothing, Father, just I've been thinking a lot about my future, about music." "Your music is a gift from God," he said, stopping in front of the desk. "A gift that should be used to glorify Him, not to feed your personal vanity." "It's not vanity," she said, surprising them both with the firmness in her voice. "It's expression, art." Pastor Lewis studied his daughter's face with renewed attention. He had been dealing with the faithful for decades, knew how to recognize the signs of rebellion before the person even realized they were rebelling. "Expression," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Art. These are words I didn't expect to hear from you, my daughter. These are words of the secular world, words that lead to temptation and sin." "Why does music have to be sin?" asked Emily, her voice still low but filled with a courage she didn't know she possessed. "Why does everything that brings beauty to the world have to be seen as a threat?" The question caught Pastor Lewis off guard. In 22 years, Emily had never questioned his teachings directly. She had obeyed, agreed, submitted to every rule and restriction without significant protest. This new version of his daughter was unknown territory. "Worldly beauty is an illusion," he said, returning to the familiar discourse, "a trap of Satan to lead us away from the path of salvation. True beauty is in purity, in obedience, in submission to divine will. And what if the divine will is for me to use my talent differently? Don't be presumptuous, Emily. You don't have enough wisdom to interpret God's will. I am your pastor and your father. It is through me that he speaks to you." Emily felt something break inside her. It was as if a string that had been stretched for years finally reached its limit. She stood up from the chair, surprising her father with the sudden movement. "And what if I disagree?" she asked. "What if I think God can speak to me directly?" Pastor Lewis's expression changed instantly. Paternal concern gave way to something colder, more dangerous. "Be careful with your words, girl," he said, his voice low but laden with threat. "Pride was the first sin, and it was what led to the fall. You are treading a dangerous path." "Maybe," said Emily, feeling the words leave her mouth as if they belonged to someone else. "But for the first time in my life, it's a path I chose." She left the office before her father could respond, leaving him alone with his indignation and, for the first time in many years, with genuine fear. Pastor Lewis knew the power of music, knew how it could awaken dangerous emotions, how it could make people question established truths. That was why he so rigidly controlled his daughter's repertoire, But now she was escaping his control, and he needed to act before it was too late. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Caleb was dealing with his own demons. Raymond Sullivan had finally secured a meeting, and he wasn't the type of man who accepted being ignored indefinitely. They met at a discreet restaurant in Tribeca, the kind of place where businessmen discussed million-dollar deals over cod dishes and expensive wines. Raymond was a few years older than Caleb, a corpulent man with perfectly combed gray hair and small eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they saw. He wore expensive but tasteless suits, discreet but valuable jewelry, and had the habit of smiling without showing his teeth, like a shark evaluating its next meal. "Caleb, my friend," he said when they sat at the reserved table at the back of the restaurant, "how long has it been since we had a proper conversation?" "We're not friends, Raymond," Caleb replied, cutting any pretense of cordiality. "And you know that. Always straight to the point. It's one of the things I admire about you." Raymond signaled to the waiter and ordered a bottle of wine without consulting Caleb. "But sometimes diplomacy is necessary in business." "What business? You and I haven't had business for 5 years. "Ah, but we have history, and history, my dear, sometimes charges interest." Caleb had known Raymond for more than a decade. They had started at the same level, two ambitious young men trying to build empires in New York's underworld. But while Caleb had specialized in refined pleasures and vices, Raymond had chosen dirtier paths: drug trafficking, sexual exploitation, money laundering for international cartels. "Just tell me what you want," said Caleb, impatient. "I want you to help me with a problem. I have a very special client who is interested in acquiring something you can provide." "I don't work with your special clients anymore. This one is different. He's a man of God, you might say, a very respected pastor who has specific needs." Something cold settled in Caleb's stomach. He knew this tone in Raymond's voice, this particular way of pronouncing certain words when he was being especially cruel. "What kind of needs?" "He has a daughter, a very beautiful, very pure young woman, too virtuous for her own good, according to him. The pastor believes she needs a lesson about the dangers of the secular world." Raymond took a sip of wine, savoring both the drink and Caleb's growing discomfort. "He wants me to find someone to educate the girl, show her why purity is important by making her experience the opposite. I thought of you immediately." "No," said Caleb without hesitation. "You haven't even heard the details." "I don't need to hear them. The answer is no." Raymond laughed, an unpleasant sound that made other customers look in their direction. "You've changed, Caleb. You used to be more flexible, more pragmatic. People change. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse." Raymond leaned across the table, his voice low but clear. "You've been refusing to work with me lately. You've been declining lucrative opportunities. You're becoming too selective for someone in your position. My position is fine the way it is, for now. But things can change quickly in this business. You know that better than anyone." The threat was subtle but real. Caleb knew Raymond had connections he preferred not to face, resources that made a war too costly. But there were lines he wasn't willing to cross, no matter the price. "Find someone else for your dirty work," he said, standing up from the table. "Think carefully, Caleb," said Raymond, still smiling. "Sometimes it's better to work with old acquaintances than to let strangers do the job. Strangers can be less careful." Caleb left the restaurant with a bad feeling in his stomach. He had known Raymond long enough to know he wouldn't give up easily, and there was something in the way he had talked about the pastor and the daughter that deeply troubled him. That night, Emily arrived at Shadow earlier than in previous weeks. There was a tension in her shoulders, a rigidity that Caleb noticed. Immediately, she greeted Michael with a discreet nod and went straight up to the second floor, assembling her violin on the stage without the preliminary conversation that had become routine. Caleb observed her through the security cameras, noting the more abrupt movements, the way she adjusted the strings with more force than necessary. When she began to play, the difference was clear. The music came out charged with an emotion that wasn't there before, a controlled anger that transformed even the most serene pieces into declarations of war. She chose Paganini that night, Caprice, number 24, a technically demanding piece that few violinists could execute perfectly. But Emily wasn't just executing, she was channeling something deep and furious through the strings. It was music as release, as a war cry, as a declaration of independence. The audience on the second floor was completely hypnotized. Conversations stopped. Drinks remained untouched. Even the most intimate couples interrupted their caresses to observe the young woman on stage who played as if her life depended on it. When she finished, the silence in the room lasted almost a full minute before exploding into applause. Emily opened her eyes, seeming to wake from a trance, and for the first time since she had started playing at the club, she smiled at the audience. Caleb immediately went down to the second floor and found her putting away the violin, still trembling slightly from the intensity of the performance. "What happened?" he asked without preamble. "I had a conversation with my father," she said, not raising her eyes from the case. And I discovered I'm no longer the obedient daughter he raised." There was something different in her voice, a hardness that didn't exist before. Caleb pulled up a chair and sat beside her, waiting. "He told me my music should only be to glorify God," continued Emily, "that art is vanity, that beauty is temptation, that I don't have enough wisdom to make my own decisions." "And what did you say?" "I said that maybe God speaks to me directly. I said that for the first time in my life, I'm choosing my own path." Caleb studied her face, noting the small changes that had happened in recent weeks. There was a nascent confidence there, a strength that was being discovered. "And how do you feel about that choice?" "Terrified," she admitted with a bitter smile, "but also alive. For the first time in my life, I feel completely alive." They sat in silence for a few minutes, observing the movement in the club. The night was busier than usual. Groups of businessmen celebrating some closed deal, couples on discreet dates, New York's night fauna in all its decadent splendor. "Caleb," said Emily suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you do this? Why do you have a place like this?" It was a question he had expected since the first night, but still didn't know how to fully answer. "Because it's what I know how to do," he said, finally. "Because the world is full of people who need a place where they can be who they really are, even if it's just for a few hours." "And who are you, really?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in years, perhaps. "Decades? I don't know anymore," he admitted. "It's been so long that I've been just the owner of Shadow that I've forgotten who I was before that." "Do you want to remember?" Caleb looked at her, at the golden eyes that seemed to see through all the masks he wore. "Sometimes," he said. "Lately, yes." "What do you remember from before?" "I remember having a sister," he said, the words coming out before he could censor them. "Younger than me, Eliza. She played piano." "What happened to her?" Caleb's expression closed instantly, but this time he didn't completely avoid the subject. "She died because of me." "What do you mean?" "I was starting in this business. I was young, arrogant, thought I could control everything. I made some enemies, made some wrong choices. They couldn't reach me directly, so..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Emily understood. How old was she? 19, the same age you were when we met. The connection was too obvious to ignore. Emily felt something move in her chest, a new understanding about the man beside her. "That's why you worry about me," she said. "Because I remind you of her." "Maybe," admitted Caleb. "At first, yes, but now it's different. You're not Eliza, you're Emily. And I care about you for who you are, not for who you remind me of." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with a meaning that neither was completely ready to face. It was the first time Caleb had admitted to himself and to her that his feelings had evolved beyond instinctive protection. "Caleb, I know," he said quickly. "I know we're people from different worlds. I know you have an entire life of principles that I can't fully understand. I know I should probably push you away from here before it's too late. And will you do that?" "No," he said without hesitation. "I won't, even knowing that I should." Emily felt something ignite inside her, a flame that had been repressed for so many years that she had almost forgotten it existed. It was desire, but it was also more than that. It was the sensation of being seen, truly seen, by someone who didn't want to mold her into something different. "I don't want you to do that either," she said softly. The moment was interrupted by Michael's arrival, who approached the table with a concerned expression. "Boss," he said, speaking quietly, "there's a guy downstairs asking for you, says he's a pastor, that he needs to talk about an urgent family matter." Caleb felt his blood freeze in his veins. Beside him, Emily visibly paled. "What does he look like?" asked Caleb. "Tall, thin, grey hair, wearing a dark suit, has a Bible in his hand. Seems nervous, but determined." Emily quickly stood up from the chair. "It's my father," she said, panic evident in her voice. "He found me." The panic in Emily's eyes was like a punch to Caleb's stomach. In seconds, the confident young woman who had played Paganini with the fury of a goddess transformed back into the frightened girl he had met on the first night. "He can't see me here," she said, her voice trembling. "If he knows—" "Hey," Caleb gently held her arm. "Look at me. He's not going to do anything to you. Not here. You don't know my father. You don't know what he's capable of. Then tell me." Emily looked around desperately, like a cornered animal looking for a way out. "There's a service staircase at the back of the hallway," said Michael, understanding the situation. "It leads directly to the back street. No one will see her leave." "No," said Caleb, surprising them both. "Don't run, not this time." "Caleb, you don't understand." "I understand more than you think. If you run now, he will always have this power over you. Always." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but there was a growing determination there too. "Then what do you suggest? That I go down and talk to him? That you stay here, safe, while I find out what he really wants?" "He'll lie. He'll make you believe he's trying to protect me." "Leave it to me," said Caleb, his voice carrying a coldness that made Michael take a step back. Caleb went downstairs to the ground floor, where he found Pastor Lewis standing in the middle of the main hall like a dark stain on a colorful painting. He looked around with a mixture of disgust and morbid fascination, like someone observing the wreckage of an accident. The pastor was exactly as Michael had described, tall and thin, with perfectly combed grey hair and small eyes that seemed to judge everything they saw. He wore a simple but well-cut black suit and held a leather-bound Bible as if it were a weapon. "Pastor Lewis, I presume," said Caleb, approaching with measured steps. The man turned, and Caleb immediately saw where Emily had inherited her golden eyes. But while hers carried warmth and life, the pastor's were cold as metal. "You must be Caleb Vincent," said Pastor Lewis, his voice controlled but laden with contempt. "The owner of this establishment." "I am. And you're looking for me?" "I'm looking for my daughter. I have reason to believe she's frequenting this place." Caleb studied the man in front of him, looking for signs of bluffing or uncertainty. He found none. "And if she is, then you're corrupting an innocent young woman. You're using your influence to lead her away from God's path. Or maybe I'm just giving her the chance to discover who she really is." Pastor Lewis laughed, a dry sound with no humor. "You think you know my daughter? She was raised in purity, molded by the word of God from the cradle. Any change you may have noticed is the result of your malign influence." "Malign," repeated Caleb, taking a step forward. "Because I let her play music she loves, because I treat her like a person capable of making her own decisions. Because you're planting seeds of rebellion in a mind that should remain pure." The word pure came out of the pastor's mouth with an emphasis that made something move uncomfortably in Caleb's stomach. There was something sick in the man's obsession with his daughter's purity. "And what if she doesn't want to remain pure?" asked Caleb. "What if she wants to live, experience, choose?" "She doesn't know what she wants. She's just a confused child. She's 22 years old. And I am her father and her pastor. It's my responsibility to protect her from the temptations of the world, even against her will." Pastor Lewis approached Caleb, his eyes shining with a fanatical intensity. "You have no idea of the sacrifices I've made to keep this girl on the right path, of the compromises I've had to make, the alliances I've had to form." Something in the way he said alliances made Caleb remember the conversation with Raymond, a pastor with a daughter too pure for her own good. "What kind of alliances?" asked Caleb, his voice dangerously low. Pastor Lewis realized he had said too much. He backed away slightly, but not before Caleb saw fear quickly pass through his eyes. "Where is my daughter?" he asked, trying to regain authority. "Safe," said Caleb. "Away from you." "You have no right." "Yes, I do. She chose to be here, chose to tell me about the conversation you had today, about how you tried to break her spirit. I was trying to save her. From what? From being happy, from using the talent God gave her, from repeating her mother's mistakes." The words came out of the pastor's mouth like an explosion, carrying years of repressed anger. Caleb immediately saw that he had touched the central nerve of the man's entire obsession. "What mistakes?" asked Caleb, taking another step forward. Pastor Lewis realized he had revealed more than he intended. He looked around nervously, as if searching for an exit. "Her mother died when Emily was 7, he said quickly. "It was a tragedy, but it was also God's will, a punishment for her sins." "What sins?" "She was like Emily is becoming, rebellious, questioning, thought she knew, more than her husband and her pastor." Caleb felt something cold settling in his chest. There were lies there, layers and layers of carefully constructed lies. "How did she die?" he asked. "That's none of your business." "Everything involving Emily is my business now." Pastor Lewis stared at him for a long moment, seeming to evaluate his options. "Car accident," he said finally. "She was running away, trying to leave the family. God punished her for her disobedience." Lie. Caleb had enough experience with liars to recognize one when he heard it. There was something much darker in the story of Emily's mother. "I want you to leave my establishment," said Caleb. "Now. Not without my daughter. She's not going with you, not today." Pastor Lewis studied Caleb's face, seeing something there that made him reconsider his tactics. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I have friends, people who won't like to know you're interfering in family matters." "What kind of friends?" The kind that can make your little club disappear overnight. Now Caleb was certain. The connection with Raymond was real. "Leave," he said, his voice carrying a threat that made several clients look in their direction, "before I completely lose my patience." Pastor Lewis hesitated for another moment, then turned and walked towards the exit. But before leaving, he turned one last time. "This isn't over," he said. "Emily is my daughter, and I'm going to take her back home, even if it's the last thing I do." When the door closed behind him, Caleb quickly went back up to the second floor. He found Emily exactly where he had left her, but now she was crying silently. "I heard everything," she said when she saw him. "There's an intercom here. I heard the entire conversation." Caleb sat down beside her, not quite knowing what to say. "He lied about my mother," continued Emily. "I always knew there was something wrong with the story he told, but I never had the courage to question it." "What do you remember about her?" "Fragments. Her singing to me before bed. The smell of her perfume. The way she played piano, as if she were conversing with the keys." Emily wiped away her tears with the back of her hand. "There's one more thing I never told you. A few months ago, I started receiving letters with no return address, handwritten. At first, I thought it was someone from the congregation, but then I realized the handwriting was familiar to me. It was as if I had seen it before, in dreams or distant memories." She stood up and went to her bag, from which she took a yellowed envelope. "This arrived last week. I never opened it. I was afraid of what I might find." Caleb took the envelope and studied it. It was simply addressed to Emily, without a last name or complete address. The handwriting was delicate, feminine. "Do you want me to open it?" he asked. Emily nodded, unable to speak. Caleb carefully opened the envelope and removed a simple sheet of paper, covered with the same delicate handwriting. He read silently at first, his expression gradually changing. "What does it say?" asked Emily, her voice barely more than a whisper. Caleb looked at her, seeing her entire life crumbling in real time. "It's from your mother," he said gently. "She's alive, Emily. She's in a psychiatric clinic in Westchester, has been for 15 years. Emily's world collapsed. She grabbed the nearest chair, her legs failing beneath the weight of the revelation. "That's not possible," she murmured. He always said she had died. According to the letter, your father had her committed after she asked for a divorce. Said she had gone insane, that she represented a danger to you. But she never went insane, Emily. She just wanted the freedom to love whom she chose." Caleb continued reading. "She says she's written hundreds of letters over the years, but only recently managed to get someone to mail them to you. Says she thinks of you every day, that she hears your music in her soul, even if she can't hear it with her ears." Emily completely broke down then, years of pain and confusion finally making sense. Caleb embraced her, letting her cry against his chest as she processed the magnitude of her father's betrayal. "He stole 15 years of my life with her," she said between sobs. 15 years of lies. "And he would have stolen the rest too, if you had let him." They stayed like that for several minutes, until Emily calmed down enough to speak again. "I need to see her," she said. "I need to go to that clinic." "Let's go," said Caleb without hesitation. "Right now, if you want. But what about the club? Your business?" "They can wait. You're more important." The simplicity of the statement, the absolute certainty in his voice, made something open in Emily's heart. For the first time in her life, someone was putting her first, without conditions or expectations. "Caleb, yes, I think I love you." The words hung in the air between them, carrying a truth that both felt, but neither had the courage to admit until that moment. "I know I love you," he said, gently touching her face. From the first night, I knew you were going to change everything." The kiss was inevitable, gentle and desperate at the same time. It was Emily's first kiss, and she lost herself in the sensation of finally touching another person without fear, without guilt, without her father's voice echoing in her mind. When they separated, both were trembling. "We need to go," said Caleb, "before your father tries something." They left the club through the back exit, getting into Caleb's car as New York slept around them. The journey to Westchester was made in silence, both lost in thoughts and expectations. St. Francis Clinic was a modest but well-maintained complex, surrounded by gardens that seemed almost magical under the moonlight. It was nearly 3 in the morning when they arrived, but Caleb knew the medical director and managed to get them in. Caroline Lewis was awake when they entered her room, as if she knew this moment would eventually come. At 45, she was still a beautiful woman, with the same golden eyes as her daughter and brown hair that was beginning to turn grey at the temples. "Emily," she said, her voice broken with emotion. "My girl." The reunion was devastating and beautiful at the same time. 15 years of forced separation dissolved in tears and embraces, in whispered words and promises to never be separated again. Caroline told her version of the events. How she had fallen in love with a musician from the municipal orchestra, how she had asked for a divorce, how Pastor Lewis had used his influence to have her compulsorily committed, diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder by doctors he himself had chosen. He said if I tried to see you or tell the truth, he would prove I was really crazy, said Caroline. Said you would grow up believing your mother had died, and that would be better. But the letters, said Emily. 2 years ago, a new nurse arrived, Maria. She heard me playing piano in the therapy room and asked about my violinist daughter. When I told her the story, she offered to mail the letters I wrote. Caleb observed the reunion from a respectful distance, but Caroline noticed him and beckoned him to approach. You must be the man who took my daughter from his clutches, she said, studying Caleb's face carefully. I can see in her eyes that you mean a lot to her. She means everything to me, said Caleb sincerely. Then you'll protect her. From her father, from the consequences of this night, from everything that will come after. With my life, if necessary. Caroline nodded, satisfied with what she saw in his face. Emily, she said, turning to her daughter, you have a choice to make now. You can go back to the life you knew, pretend this night never happened. Or you can choose your own path, even knowing it won't be easy. I've already chosen, said Emily without hesitation. Weeks ago, when I first entered Caleb's club, I just didn't know I was choosing. They spent 2 more hours talking, recovering. 15 years of separation in fragments and memories. When the sun began to rise, Caleb gently suggested they needed to go. I'm going to get you out of here, Emily promised her mother. I'll find a legal way. I'll expose everything he did. Be careful, my daughter. Your father has powerful friends, people who won't hesitate to hurt you to protect their secrets. The warning proved prophetic. When they returned to the club, they found the doors sealed and a civil investigation team searching the place. Michael intercepted them before they could enter. They arrived 2 hours ago, he said quickly. Search and seizure warrant. They say they received an anonymous tip about illegal activities. Caleb didn't seem surprised. Raymond, he said simply. Who's Raymond? Asked Emily. A ghost from my past. Someone your father decided to use against me. One of the investigators noticed them and approached. Caleb Vincent, we need you to come with us to provide clarification. Caleb turned to Emily, taking her hands in his. Everything's going to be fine, he said, but you need to stay away from here for now. Go to a hotel. Stay safe. I won't leave you. Emily. No, she said firmly. I've already lost 15 years of my life because of fear. I won't lose you too. The investigator was getting impatient. Mr. Vincent, we need to go now. Caleb kissed Emily quickly, a kiss laden with promises and goodbyes. I love you, he whispered. Remember that, no matter what happens. They took him away in handcuffs, leaving Emily alone on the street with Michael and the wreckage of her new life, but for the first time in 22 years, she wasn't afraid. She was furious, and furious Emily was a force that neither Pastor Lewis nor Raymond Sullivan was prepared to face. 3 days later, Emily did something that surprised everyone. She organized a concert, not in the church, not in the closed club, but in the open space at MoMA, right on Fifth Avenue. She summoned the press, musicians from the municipal orchestra, conservatory students. She played for 4 uninterrupted hours, telling her story through music. Bach for the forced purity of her childhood, Paganini for the anger she felt toward her father, Vivaldi for the love she had discovered. And finally, an original composition, improvised right there, for the mother she had rediscovered and the man she loved. The crowd that formed around her grew until it blocked traffic. Social media exploded with videos of the rebel violinist who played as if her life depended on it, and perhaps it did. The public pressure was so great that the investigation into Shadow was expedited and concluded in record time. Nothing illegal was found, the accusations proved unfounded, and Caleb was released the same day. Pastor Lewis tried one last card, appearing at the apartment Emily had rented with the money from her performances. But when he opened the door, he didn't find the submissive daughter he had raised. He found a strong, determined woman, accompanied by a man who would clearly die for her. "I've come to take you home," he said, his voice less firm than before. "There's nothing left to take," replied Emily. "The daughter you raised died the night I discovered the truth about my mother. Emily, you don't understand the consequences." "I understand perfectly. I understand that you lied to me for 22 years. I understand that you stole my mother from me. I understand that you made deals with criminals to try to control me." Pastor Lewis looked at Caleb, looking for some support or male understanding. He found nothing but cold contempt. "And you?" he said to Caleb. "You think you can save her? You think you can give her the life she deserves?" "No," said Caleb with brutal honesty. "I can't save her. She saved herself. And as for the life she deserves, I'll spend the rest of mine trying to be worthy of her." Pastor Lewis left without further words, and they never saw him again. 6 months later, Emily gave her first official concert as a soloist at Lincoln Center. Her mother, finally free from the clinic after a legal battle that exposed years of illegal commitment, was in the front row. Caleb, who had sold Shadow and invested in a venue dedicated to classical music, watched her from backstage with pride that couldn't fit in his chest. The music she played that night spoke of transformation, of pain converted into beauty, of love found in the most unexpected places. It spoke of a young woman who had discovered that true purity wasn't in submission, but in the courage to be authentic. And when the last notes echoed through the historic theater, Emily knew she had finally found her voice. Not the voice others wanted her to have, but her own, unique and unmistakable. After the concert, she and Caleb walked through Lincoln Square, hand in hand under the city lights. New York pulsed around them, full of possibilities and promises. "No regrets?" he asked. "None," she answered. "And you?" Caleb stopped walking and pulled her into an embrace, kissing her under the invisible stars of New York. "Just one," he said when they separated. "Which one?" "That it took me so long to find you." They laughed together, two survivors who had found in each other the strength to completely rebuild themselves. It wasn't a fairy tale ending because real life never was. But it was something better. It was real. It was chosen. It was theirs. And for the first time in their lives, that was more than enough. 2 years had passed since that night at Lincoln Center, and Emily's life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The apartment she shared with Caleb in the West Village was a reflection of that transformation. Walls covered with handwritten scores, a grand piano that occupied half the living room, shelves filled with books about music and philosophy that she had never been allowed to read. The music venue Caleb had opened, named Resonance, had become a meeting point for classical and contemporary musicians seeking a space where they could experiment without judgment. It was smaller than Shadow, more intimate, but carried a completely different energy. During the day, it welcomed conservatory students for masterclasses. At night, it transformed into a temple where music was venerated in all its forms. Emily had become not just the main star of the place, but also its artistic director. She curated each performance, chose each musician, created experiences that transcended simple entertainment. Her reputation had grown rapidly in the New York music circuit, and invitations for performances in other cities arrived weekly. But fame also brought complications that neither had anticipated. That Tuesday morning, Emily was at the piano composing a new piece when the intercom rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. Caleb had left early for a meeting with suppliers, and her mother only visited on weekends. Caroline had moved to a small but comfortable apartment in Chelsea, financed by her daughter's growing earnings, and had spent the last 2 years rediscovering who she was beyond a woman unjustly committed. "There's a woman down here," said the doorman over the intercom. "Says she needs to speak with you about Mr. Caleb. Seems urgent." Emily felt a tightness in her stomach. In the 2 years of their relationship, several women from Caleb's past had appeared, some curious, others resentful, some still in love with the man he had been before her. But this was the first time someone had come looking for her directly. "Send her up," said Emily, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman who entered the apartment a few minutes later was everything Emily was not. Tall, voluptuous, with platinum blonde hair and a sexual confidence that emanated from every pore. She wore a red dress that cost more than most people earned in a month, and jewelry that captured the morning light like tiny suns. "You must be the famous Emily," said the woman, her voice carrying an accent Emily couldn't identify. "I'm Victoria Morrison, ex-partner of Caleb in some ventures." Emily studied the visitor's face, looking for signs of lies or manipulation. Victoria was beautiful in a calculated way, every detail of her appearance meticulously planned to cause impact. "I don't remember Caleb mentioning a partner named Victoria," said Emily, maintaining politeness, but making it clear she wouldn't be easily intimidated. Victoria laughed, a crystalline sound that echoed through the apartment. Of course he didn't mention it. Men like Caleb prefer to reinvent their past when they find someone pure like you. The word pure was pronounced with the same disdainful tone her father used to use, and it awakened a familiar anger in the young woman's chest. "What do you want?" asked Emily directly. "To protect you," said Victoria, sitting on the sofa without being invited. "You see, I've known Caleb for a long time. We worked together for years in businesses that, well, let's say weren't exactly legal." Emily felt her blood run cold, but kept her expression neutral. "Go on." "Shadow wasn't just a club, darling. It was an operations center. Money laundering, privileged information, blackmail. Caleb was very good at what he did. Perhaps too good." Victoria crossed her legs and leaned forward, as if sharing an intimate secret. "A few weeks ago, I found out through mutual contacts that Raymond Sullivan got out of prison. Yes, he was imprisoned right after that trouble with the club. But now he's free, and from what I know, he hasn't forgotten the debt Caleb has with him." "What kind of debt?" "The kind paid in blood," said Victoria simply. "Raymond lost a lot of money when Caleb refused to work with him. Lost clients, territory, prestige. Men like him don't forget that kind of humiliation." Emily got up and walked to the window, trying to process the information. Outside, New York continued its frantic rhythm, indifferent to the personal dramas, unfolding in the city's apartments. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked without turning around. "Because, believe it or not, I care for Caleb. And because you don't deserve to be caught in the middle of a war that started long before you met." Emily turned to face Victoria. "And what do you suggest I do with this information?" "Convince him to leave the city, at least until things calm down. Raymond is dangerous, but he's not patient. If you two disappear for a few months, he'll find other targets for his revenge. And if Caleb doesn't want to leave..." Victoria smiled, but there was sadness in that smile. "Then you'll have to choose between staying by his side and risking your life, or leaving alone and saving yourself." "It's not a choice," said Emily without hesitation. "I stay with him, even knowing you could die." "I've died once before," said Emily, thinking of the 22 years she had spent living the life others had chosen for her. "I'd rather die being myself than live being someone else." Victoria studied her for a long moment, as if seeing something she hadn't expected to find. "You really do love him," she said, "and it wasn't a question, more than anything. And him, does he love you enough to leave his life in New York behind?" It was a question Emily didn't know how to answer. In their 2 years together, Caleb had dedicated himself completely to building a new life with her. But New York was all he knew, the city where he had built his identity, where he knew how to navigate the dangerous currents of the underworld even after officially leaving it. "There's one more thing," said Victoria, preparing to leave. "Raymond isn't alone in this. Your father, the pastor, he hasn't given up on you." Emily felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "My father is dead to me. Maybe you're dead to him, and too. But he still has plans for you, plans that involve Raymond and some other very dangerous men." "What kind of plans?" "The kind a decent young woman like you shouldn't even know exists," said Victoria, her mask of sophistication slipping, slightly to reveal something genuinely concerned. "Just be careful, Emily, and take care of Caleb too. He may seem invincible, but all men have weak points, and his is you." After Victoria left, Emily was alone with thoughts that refused to organize themselves. She tried to return to the piano, but the keys seemed mute under her fingers. She tried to read, but the words danced on the page without forming meaning. When Caleb returned home in the late afternoon, he immediately noticed something was wrong. Emily was sitting on the sofa, still wearing the same clothes from the morning, staring fixedly at the wall. "What happened?" he asked, approaching slowly. Emily told him everything about Victoria's visit, observing how Caleb's expression gradually changed from concern to a hardness she hadn't seen in a long time. "Victoria Morrison," he said when she finished. "I haven't heard that name in 3 years." "So you know her?" "I knew her. Very well, in fact." Caleb sat down beside her, running his hands through his hair. "She didn't lie about our past. We worked together for years, and not on pretty things. Ubi, why did you never tell me about her?" "Because I didn't want that past to contaminate what we have, because I thought I had left all that behind when I met you." Emily took his hand in hers. "And Raymond, is it true he got out of prison?" "Probably. Men like him never stay locked up for long." "And my father, do you think he would really do something?" Caleb looked into her eyes, and she saw the answer before he even spoke. "Your father made a deal with Raymond 2 years ago. If he couldn't, he'd bring you back voluntarily. Raymond would have carte blanche to use more persuasive methods. How do you know that? Because Michael has ears in many places, and because I never completely stopped monitoring Raymond's activities. Emily felt a mixture of relief and concern. Relief to know Caleb had remained vigilant, concern to discover that the threat had always been there, like a shadow waiting for the right moment to attack. What do we do now? Caleb got up and walked to the window, observing the city that had been his home for so long. We have a few options, he said finally. We can leave New York, start somewhere else. Miami, New Orleans, even outside the United States. And the second option? We stay and face whatever comes. And the third? Caleb turned to her, his face somber. I resolve this alone. You go to a safe place while I do what I should have done 2 years ago. Which is? End Raymond once and for all. Emily got up from the sofa, walking over to him. No, she said firmly, we're not separating, not now. Emily, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that you think you can protect me by taking all the risks yourself. I understand that you still see yourself as the man you were before you met me. But you're not that person anymore, Caleb. And I'm not the frightened girl who walked into your club 2 years ago. She held his face between her hands. We're a team now, for better or worse. And if you try to push me away from this fight, I'll find a way to get back in the middle of it. Caleb smiled for the first time since she had started telling him about Victoria. You've changed, he said. You taught me to change. You taught me that I can choose who to be, that I can fight for things that matter. Well, you matter. We matter. They spent the entire night planning. Caleb called Michael, who confirmed that Raymond was indeed free and had been seen in the city. He also called other contacts, mapping the ex-partner's movements and trying to understand what his next step would be. He'll try to get to you, said Michael over the phone. It's his way. He won't go straight for Caleb. He'll try to use you as bait. Then let's give him exactly what he wants, said Emily, surprising both men. What do you mean? Asked Caleb. Let's use this to our advantage. If he wants to use me as bait, let him. But this time, I'll be prepared, and you'll be waiting. It was a risky plan, but it was better than waiting for Raymond to make the first move. They spent the following days preparing, establishing codes, escape routes, meeting points. Caleb taught Emily some basic self-defense techniques, though they both knew that if it came to the point where she needed to use them, something had gone very wrong. The moment came on a Thursday night. Emily was leaving a rehearsal at Resonance when she was approached by 2 men in the parking lot. She recognized one of them immediately. It was her father. Pastor Lewis was different, thinner, with deep circles under his eyes and a hardness in his gaze that she had never seen before. The man beside him was clearly hired muscle, tall and broad as a closet, with scars on his hands that suggested professional violence. Emily, said Pastor Lewis, his voice tired. It's time to come home. I don't have a home with you, she replied, keeping her voice firm despite the fear growing in her chest. You are my daughter. You will always be my daughter. And as your father, it's my responsibility to correct the mistakes I made in letting you stray from the right path. The only mistakes you made were the lies you told and the years you stole from my mother. Pastor Lewis made an almost imperceptible gesture to the man beside him, who took a step forward. You're coming with us, said the thug, his voice hoarse from someone who smoked 3 packs a day. The easy way or the hard way? The hard way, then, said a voice behind them. Caleb emerged from the shadows between the cars, accompanied by Michael and 2 other men Emily didn't recognize. All armed, all with the relaxed posture of those who knew exactly what they were doing. Caleb Vincent, said Pastor Lewis, as if pronouncing the name of a disease. I should have known you would appear. And I should have known you wouldn't give up your sick obsession with your daughter, replied Caleb. But I thought you'd at least have the decency to do it yourself, not hiding behind criminals. Sometimes it's necessary to use imperfect tools to achieve sacred goals. There's nothing sacred in what you're doing, said Emily, finding her voice again. There's just a desperate man trying to maintain control over something that was never his. You are my daughter. No, she said, taking a step toward Caleb. I am Caroline's daughter. I am the woman I chose to be, and I love who I chose to love. Our Pastor Lewis seemed to age 10 years before their eyes. Raymond was right, he said, his voice broken. You're lost, completely lost. Where is Raymond? Asked Caleb. Close enough, said the thug, finally speaking, and he sent a message. You have two options. Hand over the girl and leave the city, or you all die right here. Third option, said Michael, pointing a pistol at the man's head. You tell us where your boss is, and maybe we'll let you walk out of here. The tension in the parking lot was palpable. Cars passed on the street beside them. People walked on the sidewalks, completely oblivious to the confrontation unfolding meters away. That's when Emily did something no one expected. She laughed. You don't understand, she said, looking alternately at her father and the thug. You keep trying to negotiate for me as if I were an object, as if I didn't have my own voice, my own will, my own power. She walked until she stood between the two, her groups vulnerable but strangely powerful. I'm not going anywhere with you, she said to her father. And you, she turned to Caleb, are not going to resolve this for me. We're going to resolve this together, our way. Emily, Caleb began. Trust me, she said, her eyes shining with a determination he recognized from the first time he saw her play at the club. She took her cell phone from her pocket and began dialing. What are you doing? Asked Pastor Lewis. Calling the press, she said simply, and the police, and anyone who might be interested in knowing about a pastor who illegally committed his wife, made deals with criminals, and is trying to kidnap his own daughter in broad daylight. The effect was immediate. Pastor Lewis paled, the thug looked nervously around, and even Caleb seemed surprised by her audacity. You wouldn't do that, said Pastor Lewis. I'm already doing it, replied Emily, putting the phone to her ear. Hello, Evening News. I have a story you're going to want to hear. 5 minutes later, the parking lot was empty, except for Emily and Caleb. Pastor Lewis and his thug had disappeared as soon as they realized she was serious about calling the press. Did you really call the newspaper? Asked Caleb. I called Michael, she admitted with a smile, but they didn't know that. Caleb embraced her, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. But this doesn't solve the problem with Raymond, he said. No, agreed Emily, but it gives us time to think of a better solution than a war in the middle of the street. They returned home in silence, both knowing that the real battle was still to come. But for the first time since this whole